Znajdujemy się w sytuacji trudnej w Unii, potrzeba jest zdecydowanego działania.
Centralizzato. I cittadini vogliono vedere i loro problemi quotidiani risolti dal livello di governo più vicino a loro e vedere l'Unione Europea in azione solo dove è necessario.
Nada hay de la visión de los ciudadanos europeos en los planes de este futuro de Europa que nos quieren vender. Porque para el progresismo el futuro ya está escrito de antemano. Para ello solo hay un camino posible y todos debemos transitar por él.
Działanie dokonywać się musi na różnych poziomach. Najniższy to najniższy. Nasze otoczenie, społeczność, kraj. Tutaj podstawowa rzecz, którą powinniśmy robić, to nie oddać tych kompetencji, jeśli nie musimy.
Como se puede ver en la doctrina que profesa este consenso de izquierdas niega totalmente, radicalmente la libertad humana y la verdadera diversidad de las naciones y las personas, porque excluye la posibilidad de que pueda haber caminos diferentes y soluciones diferentes a los problemas que se nos plantean a los seres humanos, tanto individualmente como personas, como colectivamente como pueblos.
I musimy się zastanawiać nad tym, jak zreformować Unię. I ta dyskusja była początkiem, tak jak naszej trasy, ale też wielkiej pracy, którą musimy wykonać, żeby zmienić, zreformować Unię, żeby dokonać resetu Unii Europejskiej, bo ten reset jest konieczny.
Insomma, anche in base ai trattati vigenti, le competenze attribuite all'Unione Europea possono essere non solo accresciute sulla strada della ever closer union, ma anche ridotte.
Ale do tego, żeby takiego resetu dokonać, nie trzeba tylko ekspertów, ale również polityków. Musimy przekładać idee na konkrety polityczne.
Добре дошли в София. Втората спирка от обиколката на европейските консерватори и реформисти.
In short, we want a community of European states that does less but does better. We want to get Europe back on track by putting Europe's national democracies back in control.
La nación y la democracia van absolutamente unidas, evitarlo. Debemos impedir que realmente una serie de grupos poderosos organicen una especie de supraestado en el cual las naciones ya hayan desaparecido, no tengan nada que decir y así realmente las poblaciones, los pueblos queden.
We know that the political situation is difficult because the Union becoming increasingly centralized organization, constraining the member states, imposing its policy on them.
Una confederazione di stati indipendenti e sovrani, un'Europa di popoli fieri della propria appartenenza, che collaborano con la massima solidarietà i grandi temi di questa epoca.
Бъдещето на Европа означава за нас повече сигурност, означава охрана на националните граници, на външните граници, означава недопускане на нелегална миграция, недопускане на износ на тероризъм в държави, в които се водят.
Return policy can never make up for border security. What we should do then is to point to these facts, talk about democracy, instead of using the word refugee when it's not about that. We should present clear policy alternatives.
Покрай тези огромни беженски потоци се инфилтрират и подобни хора, които след това се занимават с тероризъм, с организиране на престъпни структури, мрежи, трафик на хора, трафик на наркотици, оръжие и така нататък. Това намалява сигурността в Европа.
И не забравяйте нашата основна битка Европа да се върне там, където трябваше да бъде, именно в Европа на суверените отечества. Благодаря ви.
We want to rebuild Europe as a community that will offer our countries a platform for cooperation, that will promote European prosperity and security for generations to come.
Dobra vam večer i dobrodošli na međunarodnu konferenciju.
Di oggi è in Croazia, ospiti della nostra collega Ruža Tomasić.
Sve se promijenilo. Ne samo način na koji funkcionira Europski parlament, nego i način života ljudi.
Vogliamo semplicemente rendere il progetto dell'Unione credibile, rendendola veramente vicina ai bisogni dei cittadini e dando una prospettiva di crescita, sviluppo e sicurezza alle nostre nazioni e al nostro continente.
Establishment europejski też który jest coraz bardziej pannarodowy, lekceważy głosy obywateli, którzy są zakorzenieni w swoich wspólnotach, którzy kochają swoją ojczyznę, swój język, są przywiązani do tradycji i do Europy taką, jaką ona była. Dlatego my musimy pokazać jasno tę inną możliwość, inną wizję Europy, dokonać resetu Unii Europejskiej.
El principio de proporcionalidad debería de estar más vigente que nunca para que la Unión Europea actúe buscando el equilibrio entre el medio ambiente, la economía y los aspectos sociales. Han ido, como decimos, es una frase que decimos en España, como pollo sin cabeza. Es decir, han reaccionado no en su debido momento.
Kad se radi o proračunu, da se to sporo donosi teško.
Het is heel belangrijk dat we ook als Europa rondom dat inenten samenwerken. Dat we er ook voor zorgen dat de vaccinatiemiddelen zo snel mogelijk beschikbaar komen. Zodat we ook tempo kunnen maken met het inenten.
Tu su najviše štete imali mali poljoprivrednici.
Da smo mi kao pojedinci, kao skupina, kao naroda svedeni na to, i to nije samo slučaj u Hrvatskoj, da razmišljamo od danas do sutra.
Nije dobro da Europska unija nameće nekakve ideološke teme i određene agende. To bi trebala prepustiti državama članicama da brinu za svoj identitet, identitet društva.
It should be reluctant to hand over more powers on health policy to Brussels. Already last year, it is clear that the EU overstepped its powers. The corona crisis was then abused to introduce a massive EU debt, EU bonds, and also EU taxes. The next generations will suffer from it, not benefit.
Europa nije Amerika i ne može funkcionirati kao federalna država.
Occorre cambiare questa Europa, riscoprendo il vero significato delle parole solidarietà e sussidiarietà.
Bună seara! Bine ați venit la stație. Se vorbește mult despre prezent, dar mai ales despre viitor.
They have tried to tell us that the choice was between just two possibilities, more Europe or no Europe.
Prawdziwa demokracja jest możliwa także tylko wtedy, gdy już istnieje silna, gęsta wspólnota kulturowa. Demokracja jest zawsze zakorzeniona w takiej wspólnocie.
Cele mai bune soluții le au autoritățile care sunt mai aproape de cetățeni. Și dacă ne uităm la nivelul de încredere, inclusiv în România sau la nivelul Uniunii Europene, din acest motiv sunt tot mai multe voci care spun e necesar să ne păstrăm suveranitatea, adică de propriile decizii cât mai aproape de noi și nu să le dăm altora.
Așteptăm de la Uniunea Europeană de 30 de ani să intrăm în rai și o ducem din ce în ce mai rău și state întregi și națiuni dispar.
În ultimii ani, această birocrație bruxeleză, cum o numim noi, a încercat să vină cu o soluție care să se potrivească tuturor problemelor țărilor Uniunii Europene sau să ofere soluții pentru toată lumea, ceea ce nu se poate, este imposibil.
L'Unione Europea decide le politiche industriali di un paese membro. È diverso invece fissare un obiettivo e cercare di renderlo attuabile tenendo conto anche dei punti di partenza e dei diversi sistemi industriali.
După 31 de ani, România nu mai are industrie deloc. România nu mai are agricultură deloc. Sănătatea și învățământul sunt în colaps. Justiția este politizată și controlată de serviciile secrete.
L'Europa attuale è minacciata da una falsa concezione di se stessa. I suoi fautori sono incapaci di riconoscere i difetti del mondo post-nazionale, post-culturale che stanno costruendo. Un'Unione troppo spesso incapace di dare risposte concrete ai cittadini.
Europy musi być jej różnorodność, więc nie możemy tego zniszczyć.
Rămâne să ne gândim care vor fi drepturile noastre în viitor.
Principiile fundamentale care trebuiau respectate pentru restrângerea exercițiului drepturilor fundamentale. Și mă refer aici la principiul proporționalității, principiul necesității, principiul nediscriminării.
Decentralizacja Unii Europejskiej leży we wspólnym interesie całej Unii Europejskiej.
Soluția pe care este exact soluția pe care au avut proiectului. O Uniune a Națiunilor, o Uniune bazată pe diversitate, care este unită în același obiectiv.
Dames en heren thuis, goedenavond.
Ladies and gentlemen at home, welcome to this online talk show. And you might have thought this might be a 1 April joke, but that's not the case. We're just going to start. My name is Tirza van der Graaf, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. We will be talking about the future of the European Union tonight, because how much European Union do we actually want? We are talking about, we will be talking with experts, politicians, citizens, and you at home as well. Of course, you can also react, and you can with hashtag #AskResetEU, you can put things on Twitter as well. In a bit, we will go to Florian. So he went out of the streets and asked people's opinions. And we are talking about a more flexible Europe and with economic advantages of that. But first of all, something else, because first, this night is not the first time, but the 5th edition already of the ECR European Future Tour. And we are going to go to Italy first. Raffaele Vito is co-chairman of the ECR group, and we asked him about the series of conferences and what he thinks about the future of European Union.
E benvenuti alla quinta tappa.
Goedenavond iedereen en welkom op deze
Futuro de Europa, speranza. Dei conservatori abbiamo voluto
Welcome to this fifth stop on the future of Europe, a new hope that we, the ECR group, wanted to organize. It is a series of talks and discussions that has greatly attracted the interest of the civil society and citizens. Today, we are in The Hague, in the Netherlands. We are here. The hosts are our Dutch friends. I would like to congratulate them for the result in the recent elections. Personally, and on behalf of the ECR group, I would like to thank them all for this organization, for organizing this discussion, and for their big contribution in the works that are taking place in Brussels daily. As we all know, the co-chairs of the European institutions announced the Conference on the Future of Europe. Our group, from the beginning, had some doubts, given that it seems that it is another attempt to promote the federalist agenda, but also the imposition of a vision for a more cumulative Europe without any real contradiction. For these reasons, we, as European conservatives, we do not believe that this initiative can be truly useful. And for that reason, we abstained in the different votings in the framework of European groups. We believe that what we need is a true discussion about the future of Europe, acknowledging the errors of the past and also giving a very important and serious perspective of development, prosperity and safety for the future. This must be done through a democratic procedure, a participatory procedure, broad participation and broad inclusion of the civil society, of the citizens themselves, and inclusion of the national parliaments and of the regional authorities. Of course, we should not have choices that are imposed by the decision makers in Brussels. This Europe must change. It should drastically change, improving its operation and rendering Europe more agile, thus more effective. This crisis, the present crisis, highlights that we need a different Europe, not a supra-state that will do all, but an institution that possibly will do less, but in a better way, abiding fully by the principle of proportionality, subsidiarity, and of responsibility through true partnership and solidarity between the member states and the peoples of Europe. We are convinced about our ideas. We are confident about our values. I do believe that in this era, even more, we, the ECR, we should be courageous enough to claim, to support our proposals based on Euro-realism, so that this endeavor can be able to retrieve its push and the spirit of the founding fathers of the European Union. To sum it up, I would like to wish us all the best, fruitful discussion, fruitful dialogue. I'm confident that today this discussion will give many important conclusions and ideas about the work of our group. At the same time, I would like to wish you something. I would like to wish these remote discussions to be replaced shortly by another possibility, the possibility to be in person, to discuss in person when we are over with this pandemic. Thank you so much. Thank you. I wish you all the best.
Voor deze introductie tot het onderwerp.
For this introduction.
Bij aan tafel is inmiddels aangeschoven Bert-Jan Ruijsen.
At the table, Bert-Jan Ruijsen, MEP for SGP. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You're also the host of this conference, and we will go into debate in a few minutes. But first of all, we're going to Poland, to Professor Krasnodzielski. He's chairman of the Institutional Reform Policy Group in the ECR Group. Good evening.
EU-instellingen die besloten vorige maand.
The EU institutions decided last month to have a conference on the future of Europe. And that's why I was wondering, why has the ECR its own conferences?
We wachten nog even op.
We're just waiting.
Witam wszystkich. Cieszę się, że dotarliśmy do Hagi. rozmawiamy o przyszłości Europy, ponieważ dlaczego chcemy przedstawiać nasze rozumienie w Europie i nasze...
Wacht even tot de vertaling uit het Pools naar het Engels doorkomt.
Dlatego, że mamy przekonanie, że Europejczyków w naszych poglądach jest więcej.
There are more Europeans who have similar ideas as us. We are not represented sufficiently. We are not represented in this body, in this committee that will be managing the conference on the future of Europe. It seems to me that today we need defense, not only defense of our national cultures, our national competences, but we need to defend the legacy of Europe. We need to defend what Europe is, the essence of Europe.
Ik begrijp dat de verbinding volgens mij nog wel is.
With the connection, can I maybe ask a second question?
De gasten hier aan tafel zitten. Bert.
Okay, then I will go to the host.
Die zei dus dat er een flexibeler Europese Unie moet.
So the professor said that we need a more flexible EU. I absolutely agree with that. Yes. I think we need to stop thinking that we need to centralize everything in Brussels. I think the EU has become too large and too diverse, which means that we need to give more space to the member states to make their own choices, which concretely means that we need to stop transferring competencies to Brussels. It also means that we need to concentrate our collaboration on those topics where collaboration is actually needed. For example, transborder cooperation for commerce, fight against delinquency, for example. And I think we also need to give member states more space to make their own choices on their own policies.
Waar tegenwoordig veel over gesproken wordt.
In the old-fashioned way.
Daar gaan we straks ook over doorpraten.
Yes, we are going to talk about this in a few minutes.
Van 2 debatten doen we van vanavond met als.
And we are going to do that in one of our 2 debates. The future of Europe needs to be more flexible. That's the first topic of the debate. But you also have a result of a poll that was done recently, which tackles the question whether people want a more flexible Europe or not. And you're going to present the results, aren't you?
Even te laten zien.
Ja.
Yes, let's show them.
Want het is wel handig om die...
Maybe we can see some slides. There's the speaker. So normally we should see the results with the percentages on screen.
Ja, precies, want we hebben inderdaad ook een peiling...
Indeed. We have had a poll done. And it seems that most people in the Netherlands want a more flexible Europe. 58% of those who've been questioned say that they are in favor of more flexibility in the Union, which is very interesting and good to know.
Misschien kunnen we naar de volgende slide, want we hebben nog meer.
Maybe we can go to the next slide with more interesting details. About 1,000 people participated in the poll. Yes, that was actually a representative part of population amongst the Dutch population. We also asked them, what do you want with the future of the European Union? Do you want more competencies at EU level, or do you want to go to an exit? What you see here is that only 20% says we want actually to go towards a United States of Europe, so more competences for Brussels. You also see that about 23% says, I want an exit, we want out of the European Union. And interesting to see is that the biggest category is 35% of people who say that they want to get some competencies back from Brussels to the member states. And that fits into our vision, actually, a good European collaboration. But this collaboration needs to concentrate specifically on very specific domains. And also the health union. Yes. Well, a lot has been said about the health union recently, in light of the corona crisis, of course.
Samen te werken en men wil dan toe naar...
We have to collaborate more. we want to go towards a health union.
Hoe kijkt u aan tegen zo'n?
And we asked some people what they thought about this health union. What you can see here is that 46% of the people says that it's a bad idea to have such a union. And 39% thinks that it's a good idea. I think we are getting important signals from civil society here. So what they're saying is, please don't give any extra competencies to the EU. Choose for a more flexible union. That's what I interpret from these figures. And I think we have to listen to those people. Because if we talk about the future of Europe, it is important that people support that Europe.
Interessante uitkomsten.
Exactly. Very interesting results of the polls. Not sure whether we can go back to Mr. Krasnoniewski because we had some technical issues before.
Hij is niet online, krijg ik door. Dus
he's no longer online, I'm being said. Which means that we are going to watch some videos. So stay tuned and we'll come back to you in a minute.
Realism, the sensible middle way between ever more Europe and no Europe, with respect for the sovereignty of Europe's national democracies, with less bureaucracy, more fiscal responsibility, and equality for all member states. We believe the peoples of Europe want the European Union to do less to promote economic recovery and growth and more jobs, to help, not hinder our countries in getting immigration under control, to deliver a clean environment at a cost we can afford, to work with global partners to protect our security, to create jobs through free and fair trade. Europe should only act where it can deliver real added value to member states and their citizens. By putting Europe's national democracies back in the driving seat, we can build a Europe that will offer our countries a platform for cooperation, that will help promote European prosperity and security for generations to come.
Welkom terug bij deze online talkshow over de...
Welcome back at this online talk show on the future of Europe.
En de vrouw in de straat vinden van...
Of course, we think that it's very important to hear people from the street and to know what they think about this. So we sent Florian, our reporter, out to the streets, and this is what he found out.
Vandaag ga ik namens de ECR-groep...
Today, on behalf of the ECR group, I'm going to look for an answer to the question, what do people think about the EU's influence in the member states? And I'm in Holland here today. I'm in the oldest city of our country, Dordrecht. So, I've just arrived in Dordrecht. I'm very curious to hear what people think. What is the first thing you think of when I say EU? Corporation that is not running smoothly. And why? Why is it not running smoothly? Well, it's very difficult to make good agreements within the EU, and it's also difficult to transpose European legislation into national legislation, and even to give your own twist to it as a nation. That's a hard thing to do. There's a lot of work involved, and I think we can do better than that. I'm thinking of the euro, of a good cooperation, of peace, and also helping people who are struggling to get back on top. What do you think about them? Well, that all countries work together, they're all linked and work together to be stronger against the big powers in this world. And is that influence positive, according to you? I don't have a bad feeling about this, to be honest. And if the EU were to gain, for example, more power now and become a United States of Europe, does that appeal to you? I'm not sure. What do you think of the influence of the EU? Well, I don't know much about it, about the influence. I only know that the economy is regulated differently and that we have our own currency, of course. Actually, the influence is not really noticeable, except that you hear on the news that the money is distributed to southern countries and some people are not happy with that. I think it should stay the same, nothing more, nothing less. I'm not per se against the euro, but sometimes I still have to do the calculation. What do you think about when I say EU? Well, I don't know much about it. Countries working together maybe and arranging things together. Where do you think the EU interferes too much? Well, for example, with the COVID policy and certain sanctions. I'm not very politically minded, but, well, I don't know. I think that some sovereignty is important. You can hear it. Here in Dordrecht, almost all people think the same. Give up some power here and there, and for the rest, have a flexible union as we have it now.
Bij mij in de studio nog steeds aan tafel Bert-Jan Ruijsen.
In the studio we have Bert-Jan Ruijsen.
Roelof Bisschop, tweede
and also Roelof Bisschop, member of the European Parliament as well.
Wat vindt u?
So, Mr. Ruijsen, what do you think of those opinions you heard? Well, what I'm hearing here is very familiar to me. People see the added value of European cooperation. We see that added value as well. The European Union has been created in a very difficult time. And so there is an added value actually in the cooperation between countries and the EU. But at the same time, from the video, I hear a lot of people that say, wait a minute, we shouldn't give too many competencies to Brussels. We need to look after our own sovereignty. And that's a signal in which I recognize myself a lot. So we need to give form to that collaboration, but we need to limit it to certain aspects, there where we need it. So collaboration, but only at a certain level. Mr. Bisschop, do you agree with that?
Fractie en de Tweede Kamerfractie niet weten.
Well, we don't differ of opinions too much. 3 years ago, we published a report. And we did that in talks with the other group. And the name of the report was Member States Who Were at the Steering Wheel. This is the report. And of course, it is still available. Good to know, says the moderator. So we actually analyzed what is going wrong in the European collaboration. We are positive about the cooperation at the European level at some point. So you can reinforce each other, but we now have institutions that have created their own dynamics. For example, the European Commission. And they want to distort the balance of power between what we have in common and what the nations have on their level, to change that, to distort that level, that balance, and to centralize everything.
Er zitten een aantal mechanismen in dat hele.
And you have a number of mechanisms in that system, which actually even boost that. And I think we need to tackle the issues.
De Commissie die heeft het recht van initiatief.
The European Commission has the right of initiative and shows that, boasts that, and the member states actually are lagging behind because the European Commission already has a proposal, for example, for the health union. The European Court of Justice, for example, gives the interpretation of European rules, etc., and always does that from the principle of a code reunion. So always thinking what is reinforcing the European collaboration.
Geldend recht.
And then it's becoming law in Europe. So those are mechanisms
sluipende soevereiniteitsoverdracht.
That lead to a transfer of sovereignty.
Instituut. In welk van...
Not a single democratic institute in whichever member state can talk about this, but via a backdoor, it does happen. So we are clear about this. We want to collaborate, absolutely, but we have to work towards a flexible, clear federal system. And it was very surprising to me to hear that just a few months after, in our report, we were backed by a study of the Scientific Commission, and they say making the collaboration more flexible. It's as if they read our report and they totally agree with it, actually. But I'm not sure, actually, whether he read it or not. Maybe he's too busy doing other things. But the Commission should read this report, by the way. And we also offered it to Mr. Verhofstadt, and I'm sure that he didn't read it. He's still speaking in a language impossible. I mean, we don't live in the Eastern European states, if I may say. Well, it's unfriendly, I'm not going to say that, but please let's be very modest with those democratic institutions, and let's reinforce each other. Thank you. So before talking about this further, we will go to Romania and with Croatia. So we will be talking with MEP Cristian Taraș in Romania, and also Ms. Ruža Tomasic is here from Croatia. Welcome to you both. Mr. Taraș, first I would like to go to you, because what do you think about the balances between the member states in Brussels?
First of all, thank you so much for these wonderful conferences. We had a similar one a few weeks ago, and people were very open and pleased with the perspective that we offer to the European Union. As far as your question, more and more people now are questioning the direction and the leadership of the current European Union. On one side, people were faced with this pandemic, and the statistics and the sociological studies are showing that people are questioning the ability of the current people leading the European Union to actually lead the European Union to further prosperity. And this is the reason why more and more people are questioning if the solution proposed by the current leadership of the European Union is actually what we need and is the proper solution. So, answering concretely your question, I would say that the solution for the European Union, not more Europe, but a better Europe. And this better Europe cannot be achieved unless we support the sovereignty of the national states, of the member states, and supporting them to take decision closer to the people. The more we centralize the decisions, the more we bureaucratize the decisions, the more we will fail in objecting our goal to have a stronger and united Europe.
Dank, interessant.
Thank you, very interesting. Let's go to Ms. Tomasic. Good evening. What is your opinion about the future of Europe?
Thank my colleague Ruža for inviting me to this very important conference. I'm very honored to the only Europe possible actually is flexible. There's no through alternative to that if we want to uphold peace and prosperity in the long run. Everything else leads to ideological colonization, discrimination, and political tensions. We, conservatives, often speak about for Europe, trying to offer an alternative for the ever closer union. We offer this alternative as if it's something exotic or mind-boggling, but it's not. It's pure common sense. An alliance of nations that cooperate when it's in the common interest, that's completely natural. We all want things that are best for our nations, and some of these things we can achieve only together. Some other things we can do better on our own according to our citizens' will, hopes, and cultural background. There are major cultural differences in Europe, completely different mentalities. It's not possible to make some sort of universal Europeanism. We're different nations with different heritage. The only way forward is mutual respect, and that means also the respect of these differences.
Dank u wel voor uw bijdrage. Ik heb nu al...
Thank you for your contribution. I've heard the same opinion many times. Mr. Rowson, I think you agree. Why don't we have a more flexible Europe as yet? Well, we agree within our group, of course, that we need to go towards a Euro-realistic goal. I have the feeling that democracy in Europe is not functioning well. Because if politicians would listen what lives amongst the people, then they would start thinking again about the direction in which they would head. I'm looking at, for example, VVD. They are Eurosceptical during elections, and then after elections, then they launch proposals to just alleviate or to abandon the veto rights, to decrease the position of the member states, and to overrule those member states even more. So those things do not contribute, of course, but we're doing our best as ECR to convince others of the necessity of doing it in a different way. And that's one of the reasons also why we started with this tour, to show to people, look, there is a realistic alternative for the European development. Yes, and according to me, well, I think the Netherlands should have more powers on certain domains. Well, we first of all need to agree that we don't need to offer more power to Brussels. And if it would be the case, if we go towards a more close union, if we have, for example, a social policy being transferred to Brussels, to the EU, if we are talking about education going towards the EU, well, then I think that a country as the Netherlands should negotiate better. And now, for example, also the minimum wage on a European level, that's also a topic that is being talked about. But I don't see the necessity of handling this on a European level. I think you should give countries the freedom to decide that on national level. Yes, I'm very curious to see what Mr. Teresh and Tomasik think about this. Mr. Teresh, let's start with you. On which domains, which areas do you think you would like to negotiate further to get more competencies again?
Look, the idea, if we look historically, it is very important to understand what was the purpose of the European Union or the construction that was created before the European Union. And the idea of the founding fathers was not to replace the competence of the national states. The idea of the founding fathers was not to create a construction similar to the Soviet Union. The idea of the founding fathers in the 50s and in the 60s was to find ways for all these sovereign and national states to work together for a common good. And clearly, Netherlands has its own objectives, Romania has its own objectives, Croatia has its own objectives. And it is important to find a balance and leave these countries to fight for their own purpose. For example, the minimum wage. The minimum wage, there's a minimum wage in the Western Europe, a different minimum wage in Eastern Europe, because the buying power is different. You know, you cannot come with a minimum wage that would be similar across the entire European Union, because on one side, you will set up the countries to bankruptcy, on the other side, you will not be able to pay the minimum wage to the people. So even the idea to try to centralize everything, to try to uniformize everything, this is what is creating the current challenges and the current struggles in the European Union. And I think in order to be the European Union to be more flexible, to be a better European Union, to allow the member states to decide for themselves.
Ja, dank. En mevrouw Tomasik, hoe zie je...
And Mrs. Tomasik, what's your opinion? Do you agree with Mr. Teresh?
Well, yeah, I actually do agree. All these polls confirm that we already, what we already know. People do not want centralized Europe with huge bureaucracy and unelected officials running everything. I'm pretty doubtful they want that they want even elected officials on the European level with transnational ballot. In Croatia, even the best Dutch people they're not going to get any recognition from the Croatian community. So they have no recognition whatsoever. And I think it's also the other way around. I can be as well known in Croatia as I can be, but in Netherlands, I mean nothing to people there. So all these experiments are dangerous and we should all oppose them.
Dank u wel. Ja, meneer Bisschop, dan ga ik...
Mr. Bisschop, I'm turning to you now. You were reinstated in the second chamber this week. What will be your efforts this year to get the EU more flexible? Well, last week we started our efforts. We...
De premier heeft gezegd dat hij een...
It was said that...
van Spanje waarin...
Plans were made together with the Prime Minister of Spain. And Mr. Ruijsen has already mentioned it. And it was said that on the level of human rights, the veto right would be abolished. And I really mentioned that. I focused on that. And I said, when did we discuss this in the second chamber? And then they said, well, no, yes, everybody agrees on that. It's in the election program of the VVD, but we did not have a debate on that in the parliament, and that was just pushed away. I did not receive any support from the chamber, but it does mean that we have to think about that. How can we, this abolishment of this concrete example, the veto right, how can we put this on the agenda officially so the chamber is obliged to say something about that via a motion or whatever? This is the way in which it works. European institutions or government leaders are not going to claim more power massively. That's not how it works. It's the snowball effect. So the snowball that starts rolling on top of the hill and that grows along the way. And in our opinion, we need to put a blower on that, and we need to shrink that snowball so the European institutions can do what they were created for. And it's not creating a superpower. If I just may give a short example, the green card, the health card.
COVID-19 hebt.
So the card that shows that you don't have COVID-19.
In de Tweede Kamer.
We had a debate on that in the second chamber as well. And I said, why does the European Commission have to regulate that? And then the reaction was, well, it's easier if they do it. And indeed, if the European Commission comes up with a proposal, well, then that might be a good starting point. But then my question is,
voor een uitvoeringsopdracht.
It's an executive task for the European Commission from the European Council, from the individual member states. Why is it then discussed in the European Parliament? That's completely unjust. Then we're not talking about a European instrument anymore. So these are all kind of tricks that are applied all the time. I could give you many more examples, but I can't. We don't have time. No, I don't. I have to be strict because we have received a couple of questions from the audience as well. First question, maybe for you, Mr. Ruijsen, is from someone who is watching right now. Why have we reached the limit of the power of the EU, and what should be the reaction of the Netherlands when we reach that limit, which we already have? Well, have we reached that limit? That's the question, of course. Well, as the situation is now, I think we should say that we have to stop. And of course, it's very hard to say when we've reached the limit and when we are out as a party. We want to keep on taking our responsibility. We don't want to watch on the sidelines and say we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to participate anymore. Even if the developments go on, we will try and come up with alternative suggestions with a realistic proposal, as we are doing right now.
Uit het publiek.
And then we've had another question from the audience, the online audience. Flexibility gives more power on the international in the international context. Is that right? Well, it's an argument that is used a lot of the times. You need a majority in order to do something internationally, but I'm not quite impressed by that argument because I see that the EU is capable of taking decisions with a consensus, also regarding human rights and so on. Sometimes it takes a bit longer to reach a decision or sanctions, but it does work. And if it works, then you have more power, of course, in the international context, on the international stage. All right, I'm curious to listen to the representatives from Romania and Croatia. Mr. Teres, do you agree with what has been said?
Yes, I fully agree. And it is important for the people that are watching and that will be watching in the upcoming days to understand that the closer the decision is to them, and the closer the officials are to them, power they have. The further away the decision is from them, and the further away from them the people making the decisions are from them, the less power they have. I mean, the previous colleague mentioned about this green certificate. The European Commission, which is an unelected body, is making a decision that will be mandatory for all the European countries. I mean, I have to tell you that we are bombarded, at least myself, I'm bombarded with emails from the citizens of the European Union urging me not to vote for this green certificate. So obviously people are feeling that they are left out, the European Union is not taking into consideration. And in order to have a flexible Europe, in order to have a better Europe, it is important that these decisions will be given back to the people that are closer, or to the officials that are closer to the people. And those are the national officials, because they are directly elected by the citizens, and they are accountable to their own citizens.
Dank. Ja, mevrouw Tomasic, bent u het daarmee eens?
Mr. Tomasic, do you agree?
Bij de macht staan.
So the closer the people are, the better they can make decisions. What's your view on that?
Well, of course I agree, because people don't know exactly what because they're too far away. Some of them never been to Croatia. We have a different standard, different living, and I think they should listen more. They should listen more to different countries. They cannot make decisions in Brussels, and it should be bind to all of us, because that's just not fair.
Helder. Hartelijk dank voor uw bijdrage.
That's clear. Thank you for your contribution and for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Roelof Bisschop, as well, for your contribution. Later on, we will be discussing the next topic, the civil society, but let's watch a couple of videos first.
Sin fe, no. La liberté est le fondement de l'Europe. Respekt für das gemeinsame Erbe. Tradition binds our continent.
Non c'è valore più importante della famiglia.
Europa jest dobrem wspólnym. Unii Europejskiej, która z tego dziedzictwa wyrasta i która szanuje narodowe tożsamości. Only the European Union without arrogance, based on solidarity and mutual respect for its members, can regain the support of the European nations. We can do it together.
Share Tour, live hier vanuit Nederland. We gaan focussen op onze gemeenschappelijke...
Welcome back. Now we are going to talk about the common future of the EU and the civil society. We still have Bert-Jan Ruijsen at the table with us and Roelof Bisschop. And we have a video connection with Arnoud Proot, Deputy Mayor of Barendrecht, an important export community in the Netherlands, and entrepreneur Jan Hague. Welcome. The question is, can the EU help the Dutch economy, and if yes, how? Well, you can all answer this question in 1 minute, and afterwards we will talk about it further. Mr. Bisschop, you have the floor as the first one. Well, indeed, good agreements can really help the European economy. The EU was invented to regulate the single market, and the Dutch economy really benefited from that, from fishermen to carpet producers, agriculture, and so on. So the whole EU has become the foundation for the Dutch agro sector. But a very important but, you have to focus on the economic collaboration. And what is often very troubling is that there are forces that want to use the European collaboration for a bigger political unity. And that is where it goes wrong. That is where the EU gets off the right track. And in the short term, the EU can take up a powerful position on a global stage, but on the long term, this cannot be maintained. The diversity that we foster so much in Europe, that is exactly what does not allow that. Because the countries have their own culture, their own history, and you have to respect that. You have to turn that into your power, into your force. And so you have to give the countries the economic position that they can take. You have to support that by means of common policies, but you have to benefit from it all, the countries. Thank you. I then turn to Mr. Proot in Barendrecht. What is your answer to the question?
Een van de grootste knooppunten van groen.
In Barendrecht, well, it's one of the most important cities for vegetables and fruit of the world. It's next to Rotterdam, and well, our port is very important. Our entrepreneurs benefit from free trade, traffic, and so on, but they suffer from the strict climate policies by the EU. An example, in the past year, we had a free trade between Spain and the Netherlands. So we have fresh salads and so on from Spain in the Netherlands day after day. So that's a good thing, but it's not good news for the smaller entrepreneurs here. Second example, the big companies have the possibility to drive around with Euro 6 engines in Europe. They don't have to pay as much contributions for the exhaust, but this does not apply for the smaller companies. So the EU should focus more on the interests of the smaller companies with quicker connections, less rules, and a fair climate policy. Thank you, Mr. Jan Haag. I turn to you. What's your answer to this question?
Aantal niet kunnen horen. But I'm very happy to contribute to this meeting because of our Jewish Christian foundation of being together in a kind of integration without real democracy, because we don't have a law. And als we gaan praten over samenwerken, dan praten we over het wonen, het werken, het welzijn. In freedom, bottom up and together. If I call Dat is
we don't have a proper constitution.
Op het gebied van onze fundamenten.
We don't have a common point of view regarding our way of thinking. I'm in favor of a large-scale collaboration, but not in favor of more power to Brussels. If we talk about the Netherlands with agro, food and technology, then I say the Netherlands is such a small country, but we do have a lot of people who are dependent on the agro-food technology sector. We are the second in the world as to export and the first one as to technology. And I think we have a lot to win in Europe, especially if we also do it together with other small countries, when we can solve all the small issues together. That is why I am in favor of a good collaboration with all the countries that are willing to work with us in a fair way, in a level playing field. That was clear, thank you. Yes, Mr. Ruijsen, you've listened to all these answers. Can you do something with this in the European Parliament? Yes, definitely, because I recognize what I've heard. It's very recognizable, and those are all signals from which I think this is really the core of the European collaboration. This is really what European collaboration means, and where it can add in value. We're talking about the single market and the added value of the single market for the Netherlands. And Mr. Proos and Mr. Hague have already mentioned it as well. The Netherlands as a trade country, a very important port in Europe. The single market is very important for us in the Netherlands, so we can sell our products in the right way. 70% of our export goes to European countries, European member states. We're talking about billions of euros. So those are all enormous amounts. So we have huge interests to defend. And that is why I'm saying that we should really promote this single market, that we have to create a level playing field, that we have a fair competition. And we have to indeed pay attention to the small companies and the mid-sized companies, that we don't bombard them with any rules, because that's not really in favor of them. Yes, I'm turning back to Mr. Proos. You already mentioned the smaller companies, the family companies. What can the MEPs do in order to help your community, or are they already helping you?
Oh, ik begrijp dat meneer Proos eventjes...
I think that there's a problem with Mr. Proos's connection. Well, Mr. Bishop, what's the opinion of the second chamber in the Netherlands towards this issue? Well, it changes. You see that during elections, he used skeptical voices, but they are not always turned into reality after the elections. So people always try to reach a realistic EU policy, but sometimes people say something before the elections and then they don't do it after the elections. So that often creates problems during European meetings and so on. So it's always vague. It always remains vague. And it's really important, however, that we focus on that as a Dutch government. And this should be improved. And I don't have a lot of colleagues in the Dutch government that are explicitly in favor of the Nexit. So people are often vague, always remain vague about those points of view. They don't always speak the truth. And so it's always a balance exercise, really. There's also a lot of tension in this political dossier, but we try to take up a realistic position and try to focus on an alternative. For example, in the past, we tried to talk about the future of the EU. We published a white paper, and but nothing was really done with that. We will soon have a conference as well about the future of the EU, and then we will really have to make sure that we do something with that we as a chamber can have a contribution and can change something, because otherwise everything will go through social organizations who are consulted, but then nothing will happen in the end. And then we won't get any results, that we want, the results that we saw in the poll that was presented by Bert Jan, for example, and then nothing is done. So in our opinion, we have to step away from the outdated way of thinking, the heavy structures. We have to move towards a modern, flexible kind of networking concept. And then you can have fruitful discussions. And then you can even avoid discussions about Nexit, because then the opt-outs will be realistic options. And then you can defend your national interests and really go for it and still be loyal to a vital, healthy EU. Exactly, Mr. Jan Haag, I'm turning to you again because I'm very curious. Mr. Proos has said that companies can suffer from the EU, especially regarding rules about the climate. Do you notice that in your sector as well? The first question is which companies? Well, I am a shareholder in many companies, but if we're talking about the companies in the Netherlands, then I think that we have benefited a lot from the European integration and collaboration, especially when we're talking about the same currency and so on. There are a couple of local obstacles, of course, when we talk about national legislation. And if we're talking about companies that export in the food and technology sector, that's a whole different story, because a lot can be done there if we're talking about the level playing field. So there are still a couple of issues to be solved. Also the discussion with China, for example, that's going on. We need to have a better connection between the economies, West and East, and then also North and South. We can have an enormous influence on the positive development of Africa. So that's a whole different story. That's clear. Thank you. I think that Mr. Proos is back again. So I'm going to repeat my question. You talked about the family companies, the smaller companies, that they should get more support. And I was just wondering, what could Mr. Res and other MEPs do to help your community further? Make sure that there is a policy for the smaller companies as well. So a policy that does not only benefit the bigger companies. We have to pay more attention to the smaller companies, to the family companies. And we have to make sure that smaller companies receive subsidies as well. Can you give an example of subsidies? Well, an example is the train connection from Spain to the Netherlands. That's a very marvelous initiative, but it should not be paid for by the smaller companies. Exactly, thank you. We have received a couple of questions from the audience as well again. First question is it correct that countries give economic support while the EU also gives billions of euros to support? What's the correct balance? Well, the balance is not there now. The support packages that we receive from Brussels. Those are all mega packages, but that's not really intelligent. That's not really smart, because I think it's the responsibility of the member states themselves to keep the economy going. There is a role for the EU, but it's more of a supporting role, a facilitating role. So the balance is not right. And these mega support packages from the EU, we collect those by borrowing money from the capital markets, which means that we create enormous debts that we have to pay back for years to come. What are you, 10 years, 20 years? No, it's until 2058. Yes, I think that's an enormous financial burden, isn't it? Indeed. It's something that we carry, all of us, for years to come. And then the question is it still feasible to pay it back? Especially, well, if the interest starts increasing again soon, it will be even more difficult to pay back our debt. We will give our debt to the future generations. So we will create problems for the future generations. And that's not a good thing, isn't it? So is this something we really want? No, we don't want that. Also, the EU gaining taxes. So that's not something that the EU should do. So the support packages, well, those support packages might be positive, but the balance is off. There is no balance anymore. Exactly. Never waste a good crisis. And then we received another question from the audience. Would it be a good idea to harmonize the VAT tariffs? I know that there are different VAT rates in the member states, and that leads to abuse. So you could act on that, but to put that decision at EU level to determine how high the VAT rates are, that's not a good idea. It's a bit parallel to the taxation, but high-tech companies, the Googles and the Apples of this world, to tackle those and to make European agreements for that, that would be a good idea, an excellent idea. But you should not do that taxation on EU level, but on a member state level. And that would be a better thing. And the discussion is framed in such a way that you are either in favor or either against taxation of those giants like Google or Apple. No, that's not what the discussion is about. We are all in favor of a reasonable taxation of those big companies. But the real discussion is about the fact whether the EU will do that or the member states will do that. And we are in favor of having it done by the member states and make clear agreements on that.
Very clear. So we've almost come to the end of this broadcast. We'd like to thank our guests for their contribution to this debate. And to conclude, Bert-Jan Brouwsen, which conclusions will you take back to Brussels? Well, several conclusions. Just to bounce back on the last part, what was said, the internal market, of course, is a very important part of the European collaboration. But improvements are possible, of course, mainly in offering support to small and medium enterprises, and also make sure that the consequences as far as imposing regulatory frameworks upon those companies diminishes, and also offering support to the internal markets. So I think there's an added value of the European collaboration in that. And I also think we need to work towards another type of cooperation. We need to go towards more flexibility. We need to put the member states at the steering wheel more, and we need to concentrate the collaboration on the trans-border subjects, in which the European collaboration really offers an added value. This was the Dutch edition in the for the edition of the European Future Tour. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here, all of the speakers as well. The ECR is, of course, going to continue, and the European Parliament, Member of Parliament, Peter Lundgren of the Swedish Democrats, will tell you where and when.
Europeiska unionen som en före detta handelsunion är världens mest storslagna projekt i modern historia.
We wachten even tot de vertaling komt uit het Zweeds naar het Engels.
Krig. Europeiska unionen består av nästan 500 miljoner europeer och 27 länder. Vi bor i Europa och vi bor i den Europeiska unionen, men jag kommer alltid att vara svensk. Det ligger i svenskars natur att vara jämlikhetssträvande, ödmjuka och finna det absolut oacceptabelt att skryta. Svenskar pratar mjukt och lugnt. Familjen är extremt viktig i Sverige och så är även barns rättigheter välskyddade inför det faktumet. Män och kvinnor är jämlika.
Die vertaling komt er jammer genoeg niet, dames en heren.
Män och kvinnor har rätt till föräldraledighet under barnets 18 månader. Man ska alltid vara i tid till ett möte. Vi har traditioner under midsommar. Europas framtid är den mest varierande Det gör Europa till den mest fascinerande och den intressanta kontinenten i hela världen. Tyvärr ligger det i den Europeiska unionen blir mer och mer mammor ska få barn, hur mycket el vi får förbruka och hur stora våra jordgubbar ska vara. Och många av oss är ju inte ens medlemmar. Finns det en gräns för samarbete mellan våra vackra länder och Europa? Vad är slutmålet med EU? Hur spenderas deras skattepengar? Kommer EU fortfarande prioritera? Kan vi behålla våra egna kulturer och värderingar när vi inte längre har något att säga till om när det gäller invandring? Är EU-skepsis en fråga om vi behöver välinformerade debatter och vi behöver vara kritiska mot Europeiska unionen utan att vi blir stämplade anti-europeiska. Vi tror på att självstyrande nationer är hörnstenen i internationella samarbeten. Det är inte de europeiska fördragen som för Europas länder samman. Europas länder kan samarbeta på och vänskap utan för mycket påtryckningar från Bryssel. Vi vill prata om det och många andra frågor i Stockholm med våra vänner från olika självständiga medlemsländer från ECR. Om Europas framtid. EUs framtid. Och ni är alla hjärtligt välkomna till ECRs konferensturné Europe's Future, A New Hope i Stockholm den 8 maj klockan 17.00 prick. Tack.
Dat was het voor vanavond. Heel hartelijk dank voor het kijken en graag tot de volgende.
Thank you so much. See you next time for the next ECR conference and have a great evening.
There's a new hope for Europe. A Europe of jobs, prosperity, and recovery. A Europe that safeguards its citizens and borders. There's a Europe that respects its national democracies. There's a Europe that does less and adds value for you. There's a Europe that looks inwards and outwards, for trade, for security, and for friendship. It's time to get Europe under control and back on track. It's time for a new hope for Europe. It's time Reset EU.